Well, guess it's time to get more familiar with how this kicking rule works. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome to the first ever Seattle Kraken R&R, or at least regular season 1 anyway. Unfortunately, it isn't the result that us Kraken fans would have liked to see, as the Kraken do fall to the Vegas Golden Knights in their first ever game, 4-3, but showed that they definitely belong in this league and can be competitive against supposedly one of the league's better teams as they fight back from an early deficit that, let's be honest, was somewhat self-inflicted. But jumping right into the game, the Kraken came out of the gate with a lot of energy, and it showed early on as they created two great chances early on, one from Schwartz and then a rebound that Eberle nearly put in and probably would have on a basically empty net if it wasn't for a great defensive stick check from one of the Golden Knights players that ended up sending Eberle's shot over the net. And really, early on, even outside of those two shots within the first minute of the game, the Kraken controlled the play 5-on-5 pretty well. Unfortunately, it ended up being Vegas that would get on the board first on a good passing play up the ice, but also it looked like some defensive miscue or miscommunication on the Kraken's part that led to a 3-on-2 odd man play for Vegas with some fancy passing and a shot from Pacioretty that ends up going over Grubauer's glove and into the goal. Yes, that was a shot that you probably would have liked to see Grubauer come up with, but he had pretty much been sitting alone at that end of the ice, getting cold, as some people would say. Again, Seattle had been controlling play, and that was really the first chance that he saw. It was a good one, and again, while maybe you'd like to see him save it, it gets over his glove and into the goal. And unfortunately, the early first period troubles for the Kraken weren't over just yet, as another defensive miscue, this time in the defensive zone, found the puck on Jonathan Marchessault's stick, where he was basically pretty much left alone in front of Grubauer with half of the ice to himself, and was able to dangle it around Grubauer and put it with his backhand around Grubauer's outstretched leg. Again, this is one where maybe Grubauer came a little bit too far out of the net to kind of try and poke check with his toe on Marchessault, but again, you can't be putting him in that type of situation where he's basically one-on-one with the defense pretty much watching from the side of the play. So unfortunately, at that point, only 8.5 or so minutes into the game, Vegas was already up 2-0. And again, it wasn't for the fact that it seemed like Vegas had been controlling the play, because they really hadn't been. Seattle seemed like they had been in control for the most part, but a couple of defensive miscues or miscommunications with what seemed to be a couple of guys on the forecheck really throughout most of the game, where you really only want one, led to some odd man rushes, turnovers in the defensive zone, and Vegas is a good enough team that they're going to capitalize on those. I also forgot to mention early on before those two Vegas goals that Seattle did get an early power play after creating those early chances, where Geekie had a couple of pretty good chances, but Vegas was able to kill that without anything going into net, with Leonard looking pretty good early on. Outside of that though, while again Seattle did for the most part tend to get the best of the 5-on-5 play, they really didn't get any more good chances until Tanev got a completely free breakaway, which unfortunately he kind of overhandled and ended up losing control of the puck on his last move to the backhand, which I think he probably would have had the goal if he could have made that move to the backhand, as he pretty much had Leonard beat with that last move. Unfortunately, the puck gets away from him and into the corner, and it turns out to not even end up getting a shot on goal, but still, it was an exciting play, and Tanev just misses being the first to score the Kraken's first ever franchise goal. But by the end of the first period, even with the Kraken fairly significantly outshooting the Vegas Golden Knights, two much better chances for the Golden Knights end up leading to goals, where the Kraken, again, outside of a few pretty decent chances, were limited to kind of their shots coming more from the outside that Leonard could handle pretty well, which, to be fair, is kind of to be expected from Vegas, who is a very defensively solid team and didn't have, at least early on, the same level of miscues that Seattle did on the defensive end. Sorry, quick correction. Actually, Vegas ended up getting onto the board the first time 3 minutes into the game, and then got that second goal another 3 minutes later, 6.5 minutes into the game. So it was a pretty quick 2-0, again, pretty early in the first period. And going into that first intermission, even though it was 2-0 on the scoreboard, it seemed like Seattle had been playing a lot better than that. It was pretty much just those couple of defensive miscues that Vegas jumped on top of and turned into goals. 2 goals actually on their first 3 shots, which is really not what you want to see from Grubauer, but again, even if he probably could have come up with both of those saves, they would have had to be, especially the second one, would have had to be a pretty nice save, as he was put in pretty tough positions by the defense and those miscommunications the Kraken had. So it did seem like getting into the second period that the Kraken, even though they were in a bit of a hole down 2-0, there was a path out of it, as they had created more chances than Vegas had, and as long as they could keep that pressure on, eventually goals would start going into the net. But early on in the second period, it did become very clear that Vegas was taking over the game at that point. Really, throughout the first half of the second period, Vegas was clearly the better team. And again, it was a couple of Seattle's self-inflicted wounds with a couple of penalties. First, holding on Jaden Schwartz, and then a too many men back-to-back that gave Vegas back-to-back power plays early on in the second period. So while again they did control play for most of that first half of the second period, 4 of those minutes were on the power play, and really while Vegas was on the power play, they almost looked worse than they did while they were 5-on-5. Pretty much not even getting any chances against Seattle's penalty kill until late in that third power play that they had in the game. Fortunately for Seattle though, even though they did get some pretty good chances at the end of that last power play, Grubauer was up to the task at that point and was able to stop all of them. Unfortunately, that didn't necessarily hold true after the power plays were done, as Pacioretty would get his second of the game and third for Vegas, putting them up 3-0, again just 6.5 minutes into the second period. At this point, especially with Vegas looking like they were starting to take more control of the 5-on-5 play, it seemed like things might start to get out of hand in a bad way for Seattle. But a little bit over halfway through the second period, the Kraken start to get momentum going back in their direction a little bit again. They end up getting back on a power play, and while they don't end up scoring on that power play as it's coming to an end, their last push into the offensive zone as the power play does end does create a couple of chances, now 5-on-5, a couple of rebounds that Leonard isn't able to handle, and one of those finds the backhand of Donato's stick, and he puts it in for the first goal in Seattle Kraken history. Yup, just like everyone expected when he was signed, Ryan Donato is the first Kraken to score a goal in the history of the franchise. And not to pat myself on the back too much, but I did say that I thought the first goal for the Kraken would end up coming from one of Donato, Dunn, or Appleton, and while Appleton had nothing to do with this goal, it does end up coming from Donato, and one of the players on the assist was Dunn, with the other one being Donskoy. And as far as the goal itself is concerned, even though at this point in the game it does just make it 3-1, and with how things had seemed like they've been going so far to that point in the second period, it still seems like Vegas is kind of in control of this game. I do think it's a really important one for the Kraken, as ultimately the worst thing that could have happened in this game is the Kraken end up getting shut out, and they go into that second game in Nashville with that first goal in franchise history still kind of looming over them and turning into more of baggage than this fun thing that the players are seeing who ends up getting it. So breaking that ice, even if they do end up losing the game, which again they do end up losing, still I think was probably the most important thing here. And for Donato, who is a player that, as we talked about when he was signed, probably is in his last chance here in Seattle as far as his NHL career is concerned, because the previous places he's been, he really wasn't able to get into positions to show the talent that he does have, especially with the puck and the shot that he has. Seattle has been able to, at least so far during the preseason and now in one regular season game, get him in positions to use that talent to the team's advantage. And he's looked really good so far, and obviously earned his way onto the third line and earned his way to that first goal with a strong net front presence that he was in position to get that rebound and get that first goal for the franchise. Unfortunately, though, we wouldn't get long to focus on and enjoy that first goal in franchise history and Donato as the Kraken's franchise leading goal scorer. Fortunately, however, that's because just over a minute after Donato's goal, McCann gets another one past Leonard and into the net to make it 2-3 Kraken. Now, when this goal happened, it really seemed like, to most people, it seemed like even the Kraken, that the goal was going to be Schwartz's goal, but it ends up getting credited to McCann as he's the one that shoots it across the front of the net. It goes over a pile of sticks, 2 Vegas sticks, and one of the sticks being Schwartz, and apparently they assumed that the stick that it ends up going off of and past Leonard into the goal was one of the defending sticks by the Golden Knights, but either way, the puck ends up from McCann off of a bunch of sticks and into the net to make it 2-3 Kraken. And for Schwartz, even though he doesn't ultimately end up getting credited for the goal as McCann does, he did still end up getting credit for one of the assists, with Eberle having the other one. And just like that, suddenly we've got a game on our hands. And much like, I guess in an opposite way, how those first 2 quick goals for the Golden Knights in the first period seemed to kind of take a lot of energy out of the sails of the Kraken and deflated the bench a bit, these 2 quick goals for the Kraken in the second period to get them back in the game really once again started to move momentum back in the Kraken's favor. Even though right after the second goal, the Golden Knights did get a couple of more quick chances on Grubauer, he was up to the task for those, and for the rest of the second period, even though they don't get on the board again, the Kraken really controlled play pretty well 5-on-5 for the last, I guess, 6 minutes of the second period. So coming into the third period, again, the Kraken have momentum on their side, down just 1 goal, and playing ultimately over the course of the game as the better team. And as the third period gets started, early on, the Kraken maintained that momentum, though as the period would go on, it did kind of go back and forth a little bit more, and ultimately I would say the third period ended up the most even between the 2 teams, especially 5-on-5, which most of the period was played at. But it is the Kraken who end up getting on the board 7 minutes in, first in the third period, with Morgan Geekie having a beautiful shot coming from the side as he enters the offensive zone, putting it over the glove and into the top of the net past Leonard, making it 3-0 Kraken and tying the game, with the Kraken coming all the way back from that 3-0 deficit. And not that there weren't other good shots and scoring plays throughout the course of the game that we've already talked about, but as far as a pure shot is concerned, this was easily the best shot of the game, and Geekie just straight up beat Leonard and the defenseman who was on him, which I don't remember who it was, but beat both of them again with a beautiful play pretty much by himself, though there is an assist that ends up going to... Sorry, the assist was from Lauzon, who was the one that passed it up to Geekie while he was in the neutral zone, but it was still Geekie who took it from there into the offensive zone and had the beautiful shot to end up scoring the goal. So while Lauzon is deserving of the assist for his part in the play, this one was pretty much all Geekie. And again, this is a guy who a lot of people are looking at as potentially one of these breakout scorers that the Kraken are basically guaranteed to have this season. Now, whether or not they'll have breakout scorers at the same level as Carlson or Marchessault for the Golden Knights in their first season still remains to be seen, but the Kraken are going to have guys playing and having career years basically by default if they're going to be anywhere above bottom 5 in the league. So Geekie is definitely a guy to be keeping your eye on, especially based on how he played in the preseason and even in this game against, again, one of the better teams in the league, especially defensively. Unfortunately, though, again, after another Seattle goal, the celebrations would not last very long, and this time it actually is for an unfortunate reason, as less than a minute later, Vegas would answer back, taking the lead 4-3 on a goal that, while apparently it's technically a good goal, definitely seems like it's very much within the gray area of the kicking rule, as Pacioretty passes it over to Stephenson, who definitely clearly kicked his heel out a little bit to have the puck bounce off his skate and into the net. And as they were saying on the broadcast, apparently he's allowed to move his skate so that it deflects into the net, but he definitely kicked his heel out, and I can't show the play without getting a whole bunch of copyright issues going on, but maybe I can get a screenshot up here or something that still doesn't really get the gist of the play, but it was definitely a clear kick of Stevenson's heel out that ends up having the puck go off his skate and into the net. Absolutely, it was deliberately done as far as the kicking motion is concerned. Whether or not by the rule that is considered a distinct kicking motion, I guess is a little bit more up to the ref's interpretation, and clearly as this one does end up going to replay and end up getting upheld, they do decide that it wasn't enough of a distinct kicking motion to disallow the goal. I think this might partially come down to the fact that it was called a good goal on the ice as the play was happening and not disallowed. Maybe if they call it kicking when the play happens, they can't overturn it the other way, but again, they call it good goal, goes to replay, and they decide it isn't kicking, and it's 4-3 Vegas. But I know I'm not the only one who's curious then about how this kicking rule works. So I decided to go look it up a little bit more clearly, and this is how the rule reads directly from the NHL rulebook. Kicking, this is the first thing in here, is the action of a player deliberately using his skates with a kicking motion to propel the puck or to contact an opponent. Obviously here we're talking about the controlling or propelling the puck and nothing to do with kicking at an opponent. So then the second part of the rule is the goal part, which is the relevant part here. And it starts off with saying, kicking the puck shall be permitted in all zones. Obviously, we know that players kick the puck all the time, have it go off their skate onto their stick so that they can control it. Again, that's not the issue here. A goal, however, cannot be scored by an attacking player who uses a distinct kicking motion to propel the puck into the net with his skate or foot. Now, during the broadcast, they were talking about, as they were reviewing this, the fact that because it was on the outside of his skate and that he was more changing the angle of his skate so that the puck would deflect off his skate and into the net, that wasn't considered a distinct kicking motion, as it was more just him angling the puck into the net with his skate, and his momentum was already going forward at the time, which that part's true, but it definitely did seem like there was a distinct, as the puck arrived, he kind of kicked his heel out, which I guess is not really like distinct kicking motion in the sense of like a punter kicking a football or something like that, but it was definitely seemed like a distinct, clear motion of the foot to knock the puck into the goal. And there's nothing in this rule that says anything about angling, like how, like they were saying, there's nothing in this rule that has anything to do with changing the angle of your skate and that being okay. It just says any distinct kicking motion to propel the puck into the net. Nothing about being the outside of the skate or the inside of the skate or the toe of the skate or anything like that. Just distinct kicking motion propelling the puck into the net. So I guess you be the judge there, but it definitely seemed pretty borderline and probably ultimately comes down to what the call was first on the ice, which was a good goal. Again, the fuzzy part of this on the other end is that the second paragraph here starts with a puck that deflects into the net off of an attacking player's skate who does not use a distinct kicking motion is a legitimate goal. So I guess what they're saying here is that this wasn't a distinct enough kicking motion by him kicking his heel out to warrant it being called a kicking call. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a weird, fuzzy kind of edge thing that ends up determining the game. And for what it's worth, the Kraken bench was, and obviously they're not going to be like, oh yeah, no, that's totally fine. I guess technically by the rules, maybe you could say it wasn't. No, they were upset. They were definitely not happy with the call, even when it was made on the ice. They immediately were pointing at the skate like that was kicking, and then were very upset with the fact that it was upheld, which I think there's room for them to be upset here, especially considering that this is late in the third period on a tied game. Emotions are high, first game in franchise history, and that's how it ends up getting decided. But if nothing else, this is going to be a galvanizing moment for them, as this is how they end up losing the game. So I guess we'll just see if that kind of puts a chip on their shoulder, especially for the next time they face Vegas. But from there, there's still 11 and a half minutes left in the third period, and Play is pretty back and forth between the Kraken and Knights for the rest of the game. There is a period of 4-on-4 that doesn't last particularly long because Mark Stone does a very clear trip, which even he knew was a trip, as he went straight to the penalty box after the Knights touched the puck the next time, which does make it 4-on-3 for the Kraken, but they really don't get a lot going on that power play as the Knights do a very good job of killing it off, and ultimately, really, the Kraken only get a couple of more decent chances, but the Knights were defensively definitely up to the task as they were able to close out the third period on the defensive end. The Kraken did spend a lot more time in the offensive end, but every one of the time, and there were a number of them, that Eberle tried to pass the puck from behind the net in front to one of the Kraken that were standing there. The Knights were able to block, intercept, or deflect any one of those passes, and nothing really got in front of the net to a point where the Kraken could put it into Lehner's hands to try and make the stop. So even though in the last minute and a half or so, the Kraken do pull Grubauer to get the extra attacker, and they do pretty much keep the puck in the offensive zone for most of that rest of the time, they just really don't make any great scoring chances and don't make Lehner work all that hard. It's still exciting to see, especially for new fans, as it was high-tension hockey, which I guess that's really the big takeaway from this game, is that the Kraken don't end up getting blown out like it looked like they could have early. It ends up being a close game, a very, towards the end, more physical game. It really wasn't that physical early on, but becomes a lot more physical as it's close later on. And it's a hard-fought game where the Kraken end up fighting back from a 3-0 deficit, so even though they end up losing this one in regulation and come away with no points in their first game, it's a hard-fought game, and I think ultimately it's a good loss if there is such a thing for the Kraken. So especially with how the second and third period went, ultimately for the Kraken, there's really no way around the fact that this game ends up being decided really by those miscues and miscommunications in the first period defensively that led to those two early Vegas goals. Again, especially the first one, and maybe to some extent the second one, you'd like to see a goalie like Grubauer come up with, but you can't really be putting him in positions like that early on in the first game, those being really the first chances he saw from the Knights, and expect him to come up with every single one of them. And regardless of whether or not he comes up with them or not, it's still some defensive issues that the Kraken need to figure out and get ironed out as things go on in order to win games. Really, as the game went on, they did get better. There was less of that, as those weren't the only issues that the Kraken had in that first period, and it did get better as the game went on, but there were definitely times where, whether it was part of the plan or maybe more miscommunications, the Kraken seemed to have a lot of instances where they had two guys on a forecheck where they really only needed one, which did lead to a number of odd man rushes for the Golden Knights. Fortunately, the Kraken, especially as the game went on, were able to break up a lot of those odd man rushes, but there were way too many of them to be comfortable with going forward. That having been said, it is still early in the season. It's just the first game after all for, again, a brand new team playing together for the first time. So miscues and that kind of stuff, miscommunication especially, is bound to happen. I mean, even with the Lightning in the first game tonight, which is a back-to-back Stanley Cup winning team, we saw a number of similar things from them. So this is kind of just early season hockey that does kind of just happen anyway. And I think some of it may have been made worse, especially as the game went on, with the Kraken starting to kind of mix up, especially defensive pairings, to see what was working and what wasn't compared to the first period with some of the issues they had there. While I do think that it's something that Kraken should be trying, different defensive pairings and all that, I don't know that trying it mid-game in the first game is necessarily the right way to go about it, but I guess we'll see how things end up looking as time goes on. Ultimately, we got to see an NHL team play for the city of Seattle and play a close, exciting game, even if the outcome isn't what we wanted, which, as far as that's concerned, I know a lot of people in the live stream, which if you joined us for the live stream, thank you very much for that. It was a lot of fun having you guys there, but we saw some people talking about how the Seahawks have kind of had this reputation of playing close games and toying with the heart health of Seattle fans. And the Kraken kind of did that again in this first game, and I would expect to see the Kraken be doing a lot more of that as the season goes on. So, yeah, I'd get used to these close games if you're a Kraken fan. Aside from that, the Kraken will be back at it Thursday night in Nashville looking for that first win against a team that they, again, if they play like they did tonight, should be able to get that first win against. Only time will tell though, and we'll definitely be seeing you after that game. So if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that I'd appreciate you using. If you do have any questions about tonight's game or questions during the Nashville game or anything like that, do let me know about those down in the comment section, or you can hit me up on Twitter and I'll answer those in the next R&R. Until next time though, stay safe out there, be good to each other, and go Kraken.